Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. I've entitled this video, The History of the Masters of Wisdom for Dummies. Now, I'm not calling you a dummy. It's just based on the book series, like Windows for Dummies or C++ for Dummies or creating website for dummies or whatever, trying to make it simple, right? Trying to simplify it. And I'm going to start off by saying, I've talked a lot about where we're at today, right, with Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, right? Maitreya is on TV, speaking directly to humanity, not claiming to be who he is, speaking in a very gentle and muted, with a very gentle and muted message, in order to not alarm anybody or create panic or fear or whatever, right? But of course, eventually it's going to start to, Maitreya is going to turn the heat up on his message more and more and more, right? And people are going to start to, once he sees that the reception of his messages will be more received or better received, then he'll start to talk more and more direct and stuff with a greater sense of urgency and things. But for right now, this is where we're at. And of course, the other masters are waiting for the day of declaration for him to declare himself first, and then he's going to start introducing these masters into the world at some point. Now, you might believe what I say. You might not believe anything that I've been talking about over these videos, right? But let's just assume you believe it on some level, right? Maybe not as much as I believe it to be or whatever. But you probably don't know the history that it took to get us just to the point where we're at today. And how massive of an effort it is. I mean, it really is nothing less than lifting up Mount Everest and moving it 20 feet. You'd think it was just a simple little thing, getting an interview for a guy on TV, right? Some average Joe on TV, right? But it really hasn't been. And because we only see what we see, right? Now, I don't think we'll truly appreciate the efforts of not only the masters, but the Space Brothers, but also the countless millions of people to get this done, whether they were aware of it or not, to get us to the point where we're at today until we're a master. And then we see it through the eyes of a master. Because now, again, the reappearance of the Christ has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And it might be quite shocking to the point of people getting very pissed off by me saying this, but Jesus was a part of the return of the Christ, and the Buddha was a part of the return of the Christ. But the history that I want to talk about is over the last 150 years. Now, it started 150 years ago, kind of the final phase of preparing humanity for Maitreya to come out on TV. Started with Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian woman who lived in the late 1800s. And she was the first person to kind of get the ball rolling. And she started talking about the Masters of Wisdom, that she's had experiences with them, met them, and so forth. That started writing some of their works through and had them published through her group, the Theosophical Society. And I would like to sit here and say that the reception was really positive, 100% positive, but of course it wasn't. And she created a huge shitstorm is what she did. And to this day, even after 100 or so years of her being, since she's passed away, if you read about her, the press is never really good. I mean, there might be a few out there, but for the most part, it's really bad. But she's a tough woman. She has a very thick skin, but she really took it on the noggin to get this information out there. Now, around the time of her writing, the masters were thinking that it would be another 1,000 years or so before humanity would be ready for us to, receive their information. So that was their thinking at the time. So there was a disciple that came out of the ranks of the Theosophical Society. His name was Krishnamurti, and he was being groomed to be the world teacher for this age, the age of Aquarius, just as Jesus was the world teacher for the age of Pisces. And that was the initial plan, that he would give the talks, and then after about 1,000 years or so, the masters themselves and Maitreya would come back into the world. So, 3000 AD or so. And what happened is these masters see time as one event. They see the past, the present, and the future all as one. So they don't see it linearly the way that we do. That's an illusion from what the masters say. And when they look into the future, they see all the scenarios that could possibly happen based on whatever event they happen to be looking at. And from a very unlikely scenario to a very, very likely scenario. So that's how they make their predictions on the future based on that. And things change, humanity changes it based on their own free will. So then that it's always kind of in movement and stuff from where they see it. But that's kind of how they see it as a general, to simplify it. And I say all that to say is there was then a disciple that came out right after Helena Blavatsky. And she came out of the Theosophical Society too. Her name was Alice Bailey. And she started writing some books with the help of one of the masters, the Master DK. Now, I talk about this whole thing about time because what happened was right after World War I and World War II, or during that time, the prediction of the Antichrist was fulfilled. So from the point of view of the masters, the Antichrist is an energy, not an individual. Never has, never will be. And it's sent out purposefully to help destroy the old ways of thinking and relating so that a new way of thinking and relating can flourish and grow, which is, in this case, happens to be brotherhood and synthesis and cooperation and sharing and justice and all that kind of stuff, based, in destroying the old ways of thinking of competition and greed. So those Christians that are scouring the internet looking for who the Antichrist is are going to be waiting a long time because the Antichrist isn't coming back for another 3,000 years or so. So it's not anything that we should be looking for right now, right? Now, but I say all that say about the time thing because around the time of World War I and World War II, these masters started to see as a very real scenario, like a very, very high probability that we could destroy ourselves because of the atomic bomb. And so at the end of World War II, in June of 1945, the disciple Alice Bailey received a message from the Master DK that Maitreya made an announcement to all the masters that he himself would have to come back. And so therefore, Krishnamurti wouldn't be the world teacher for this age. It would have to be Maitreya would have to come back and do it himself, because if he didn't, we were going to go right off that cliff and destroy ourselves. That's how desperate it was. So he made this tremendous announcement in 1945. Now, he said that 3 things had to happen first before he could come back. All right? He said that there had to be a measure of peace, however low that is. It's obviously very low. Second, the political parties around the world, in the United States and other countries, had to start putting their houses in order, whatever that means to the masters. But there had to be a measure of cleaning house because of the corruption, I guess, maybe. And then the third thing was the principle of sharing had to start governing the minds of the world leaders. Now, none of this had to be perfect, of course, because the principle of sharing isn't operating perfectly, and there's not a perfect peace in the world, and political parties are still corrupt, right? But there had to be a measure of whatever he was looking at to allow him to come forward. And it was hoped that it would be around 1950, only because of the suffering of World War II and World War I would have been enough to kind of get us to change our ways. Well, that, of course, didn't happen. And the Cold War started and so forth. So his return was pushed back quite a bit, but not too long. I mean, really, just to the 1970s. And then there were 5 disciples that were picked, I guess based on their location was one of it, but also based on their ability. But one was in New York, one was in London, one was in Geneva, the town Darjeeling in India, which is a really tiny city. I hadn't really heard of Darjeeling until after I read this information. And then the last one was Tokyo. So 5 disciples were picked to make the final approach to humanity to prepare the way for Maitreya to come on TV. Out of the 5, only Benjamin Creme took the job up. The other ones either didn't believe it, or like the one in Tokyo, the woman in Tokyo, she actually believes herself to be Maitreya, actually. So, again, these masters don't infringe on free will, so that was their right and their choice, so that is what it is, right? So, Benjamin Creme started talking about Maitreya being in the world or coming back into the world at the time, right? And then 5 other masters made their way into the world and they went into those same 5 centers: London, New York, London, Geneva, Darjeeling, and then Tokyo. And of course, but Benjamin Creme says in no order of importance, but just kind of the way it happened. And then the other 2 masters, one went into Moscow, and then the master Jesus into Rome. Now, Benjamin Creme had to do a lot of work because from I think 1975, so just in 2 years of making the approach to humanity about this and the public about this, Maitreya was able to leave his retreat in the Himalayas and fly to London, fulfilling the biblical prophecy of, coming through the clouds. Now, it's not the way that Christians expected, but that was just the way he did it. And so, again, just like Jesus, he fulfills the prophecy, but it's hardly ever what people expect. So just be prepared for that when you see these masters and see Maitreya and stuff. But anyway, so he entered London on July 19th, 1977, a day that very few people probably remember unless there was something that special that happened to them specifically, right? But nothing historically happened on that day other than this, other than the day awaited by all Christians around the world that, for thousands of years came and went and nobody noticed it, right? So kind of weird. But over the last 40 or so years or so, had been waiting to do an interview, but not, pacing the floor of where he was at, but working behind the scenes to help create the environment to allow him to come forward. And then he made the prediction that there would be a flood of miracle signs out there. And then those started to kind of come in the mid to late 80s, all the way through the 90s and so forth, and even to today. And then the Space Brothers got involved and they started doing their work, not only creating these signs and crop designs and signs in the sky and stuff, but also helping us keep our environment together until we learn not to hurt it, So there was all these different groups of spiritual warriors fighting this spiritual battle to get Maitreya to where he is just today. And it obviously worked because in January of 2010, Maitreya was able to finally get on TV. And as anticlimactic as it was for yours truly, I mean, not really, but you know what I mean? Because I was expecting it to be a lot more dramatic than it was, and then what it ended up being, is still doing interviews, of course, on a regular basis, not claiming to be Maitreya, not claiming to be the Messiah or anybody other than just one of us. And this is a oversimplified view of what it took just to get us to this point. But, and as always, take action. Help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos. Have a great day.